Nice job eating your food. It's okay. Nice job.
PEPG.
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 SUGP. PEPG.
SUGP.
SUGP. UBXG. UBXG.
AIIO. AIIO.
AIIO.
LBGJ halted. LBGJ will resume at 12 hours 35 minutes and 8 seconds. HIMS FLNC HIMZ HIMS HIMZ FLNC LEU FLNC LBGJ may resume in less than a minute. FLNC MRVL MVLL AIIO MRVL MVLL.
Yeah. Okay.
MRVL. LBGJ may resume in less than a minute.
CPOP. CPOP.
LBGJ halted. LBGJ will resume at 12 hours 45 minutes and 50 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry too much. I'll get it fixed.
MRVL. AIIO. MVLL.
Yeah. I'll get it for you.
AIIO. AIIO. MRVL. AMDL. AMDL. LBGJ may resume in less than a minute. AMDL. MVLL. MRVL. AMDL. MVLL. MRVL. AMDL. MRVL. LBGJ halted. LBGJ will resume at 12 hours 51 minutes and 25 seconds.
For most people, risk means danger and uncertainty.
DVLT. DVLT. LBGJ may resume in less than a minute. AMDL.
LBGJ. CPOP. LBGJ. CPOP. LBGJ. 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 LBGJ.
IONZ.
LBGJ.
IONZ.
LBGJ.
HIMZ.
LBGJ.
There was the buy signal for WULF
CPOP.
right here. That's called the look below and fail. If you would have been ready, you could have loaded up. For a price target, I would have just go with 200% of the flusher.
CPOP.
There. There.
CPOP. SIMAW. CPOP. SIMAW. CPOP. SIMAW. SIMAW. CPOP.
C-pop, I think we already checked out. The price action here is
CPOP.
CPOP.
So, the C-pop here has got this 200% pop out here at 262, so it looks like it should
CPOP.
CPOP. FIGR. AIIO. SNTG.
SNTG.
FIGR. FIGR.
CPOP. CPOP. LBGJ.
AIIO.
CPOP.
AIIO.
LBGJ. CPOP. LBGJ.
CPOP.
CPOP. CPOP.
CPOP.
CPOP.
FIGR.
CPOP. CPOP. CPOP.
AIIO.
I'm turning 65 this year, but I have never seen any cargo pants that look and feel this good. For years.
House
AIIO.
Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is demanding an ironclad health care agreement as tensions escalate ahead of a potential government shutdown when the government runs out of money on midnight on Tuesday, September 30th. The White House Budget Office sent a memo to federal agencies on Wednesday night telling them to, quote, prepare layoff plans in the event of a shutdown. The layoffs would target any employees working on programs that are not legally required to continue during any government funding lapse. Joining me now is White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Director, great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, we know that there are only 2 legislative days left for the Senate before this
FIGR.
deadline of a shutdown. Are you expecting a shutdown?
I sure hope not. You know, it's been a bipartisan agreement 13 times in a row where Republicans and Democrats get together and just keep the government open while they're negotiating future policy issues. And what these Democrats have done is they've come to President Trump with really an embarrassingly silly offer. I think the only way to understand what's going on is that when Senator Schumer helped us avoid this last time in the spring, then all of a sudden AOC is going to be potentially threatening him for Senate. And so if the only way, I guess, to survive in the Senate if you're leading the Democrats right now is to be kind of as loopy as possible because their position is really indefensible. It's having a clear continuing resolution has been something that's happened 13 times in a row with bipartisan support, and they're willing to shut the government down. I think because first, they're worried about their left, but second, we have so much positive momentum in the economy right now that they think that they got to change the game because they're losing so bad.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because we just spoke with Stephen Myron. We've been talking a lot about the Fed's next move, and as you know, Stephen wants to see a 50 basis point cut. Jay Powell says it's a challenging situation, but he's not sure if we're walking into a string of rate cuts. Here's Stephen Myron with me just in the last hour. Watch.
First of all, I think a lot of folks are more concerned about tariffs driving inflation than I am. I have not yet seen evidence that there are tariff-driven increases in inflation. And it's really important for monetary policy to exit the quite restrictive stance that it's in, because the longer it stays in that stance, the greater the risk to the economy that you do get a material downturn in the labor market that you don't need to experience. In the coming 6 months, I'd like to see us get a lot closer to neutral than we are now. My view is that we can get there in a very short series of 50 basis point cuts, readjust monetary policy. And do you feel that there's a feeling against a 50 basis points on the Fed board? Yeah, I mean, very clearly from the outcome of last week's meeting, people don't feel the need to move urgently. And part of that is because they're still very scared of tariff inflation. But so this tariff inflation that Jay Powell keeps talking about has yet to materialize. Kevin, how would you assess the macro story today?
Right. Well, the macro story right now is, first of all, that inflation has dropped sharply since President Trump took office. Growth has been very high. We've got industrial production at an all-time high, capital spending up 8% so far this year. Mortgage rates are down in part because of the tariff revenues, down by about 70 basis points. So the typical new home buyer right now is saving $250 a month because of the lower interest rates, because of these policies. And the thing, when we go back and talk about the disappointing Fed policies that the president's talked about, you know, one of the things that I found odd, and Governor Myron has been talking about it, is that economic theorists know that if tariffs have any effect on prices, that it'll be a one-time adjustment, not an increase in inflation. And to have Austin Goolsbee and a lot of the other people that are on the FOMC talking about how inflation is why they're being so restrictive is, you know, contrary to fundamental economic policy, economic theory. And I think that Governor Myron is just pointing that out. And I actually see, watching the Fed people discuss inflation and tariffs over the last few days, that they're moving towards the consensus, which is the economic consensus, that if there were to be a price increase from tariffs, that it would not be inflationary. It would be a one-time movement. And I think that's a good thing if you're optimistic about future rate cuts.
Yeah, and especially you've got to be optimistic about what these policies have done already to inflation. Look at where oil is. Look at where some food prices are. We just spoke with Stephen Myron, who's expecting shelter and rent to start coming down as well. But I want to get your take about how you and your colleagues have been leveraging and monetizing the U.S.'s balance sheet. I spoke with Scott Bessent about it yesterday. The government taking a 10% stake in Intel. The administration now looking at a 10% stake in Lithium Americas. GM holds 38% of the Canadian-based company. Talks underway with a deal expected in the coming days. How do you see this? Is this all about national security, Kevin?
Yes, I mean, for the most part, you could say that every single move in this area has been about national security. So if you look at the Nippon Steel deal, then one of the things that President Trump decided is that we couldn't really win a war if we didn't have any steel, and our steel industry is being, you know, basically put out of business by Chinese dumping. And so we got to do something about that. And so to make sure that the things that defend our national security are there no matter what, then there are a few things. So this is also true for microchips. If we don't have any microchips, imagine production for just about everything in the U.S. stops. Then that's a real problem for national security. And so it's not a socialist policy. The government is not going in and trying to take over these companies that, you know, the way a socialist would and give them a 5-year plan or anything. We're just making sure that our national security is preserved with a small equity stake.
Yeah, I think it's very important, and I think it's worth noting for sure. It's smart, by the way. National security also revolves around those semiconductor chips, and you've got Alibaba teaming up with NVIDIA on AI robotics. At the same time, Beijing claims it wants to ban certain NVIDIA chips, saying companies like BYD and Huawei should rely on domestic suppliers. Should we believe that, Kevin?
Well, I think that China wants that to be true, because what China would like is to give Huawei the monopoly on all chip sales in China, so that then they have more money to try to develop better and better chips that compete with NVIDIA. The thing is, they're so far behind NVIDIA that, you know, I think it's the Chinese guys are going to lose the AI battle if they don't get NVIDIA chips completely. I think that we've got them maybe 2 years behind us right now, and if they want to stay 2 years behind us, they're going to have to buy NVIDIA chips.
All right, let me move on to more. Let me move on to more urgent issues, and that is Argentina. and what you have done with Argentina. Yesterday, I spoke with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, about it, because it feels like markets are certainly
Coffee,
losing credibility
$2. Lottery
in
ticket,
Milei's
$2.
policies there,
Slice of pizza,
as well as in the
$2.
peso. Here's what the Treasury Secretary told me yesterday. Watch. Then I want to get your take on Argentina.
The plan is, as long as President Milei continues with his strong economic policies to help him, to bridge him to the election, I call this the screens moving to the streets. We are not going to let a disequilibrium in the market cause his a backup in his substantial economic reforms. I don't think the market has lost confidence in him. I think the market is looking in the rearview mirror and is looking at decades, if not a century, of terrible Argentinian mismanagement. And people are concerned. People are skittish. It's very hard to believe that it is different this time, but I believe with President Milei, it is.
I wonder your thoughts here, Kevin. This is one of those outlier issues that could spiral out of control and take the U.S. down with it, can it?
No, I think that's not going to happen. And I think in part, Secretary Bessent gave me a phone call on Sunday. We started talking through the Argentine matter. He had absolute clarity about what we need to do and what could possibly be going on. And the bottom line is that our Council of Economic Advisors, our National Economic Council, our Treasury all have confidence that Milei's policies are moving Argentina in the right direction. We're also cognizant of the fact that in developing markets, sometimes there are kind of assaults, short assaults on those markets ahead of elections. It's something that's actually been a pattern that you see over and over, where people from the far left try to attack governments of the right with panic attacks close to an election. And actually, the amount of money it takes to make sure that the shorts don't determine the future of this country, but rather the people who follow fundamentals, is something that Scott Bessent has done very careful math about. And so anybody who thinks that they can cause a panic in Argentine markets has to understand that the U.S. is going to be a firm backstop to that. It's not that we're trying to put our finger on the scales of an election. We're trying to just make sure that market manipulators don't influence the election.
So should we have a confidence then that the U.S. will support Argentina?
Yes, the U.S. 100% will support Argentina and, of course, support the will of the voters. But again, there have been times where there are people who do things like they call them naked short attacks and so on, where market turmoil can be created ahead of an election by, people who maybe don't even care so much about the country as much as the short-term profit that they can make from massive
MSTZ.
panic. So
all right, thank you.
We're not going to let that happen.
Thank you for that. I want to move on to China because U.S. officials in ongoing trade talks there with Chinese counterparts. This TikTok deal moving forward, as reports say that the president will meet with Xi Jinping, but now likely next year. Kevin, what do you want to see from a U.S.-China trade deal?
Well, I think that President Xi and President Trump have a strong and warm relationship. They're talking about a lot of different things, including the fact that China is buying about half of Russia's oil exports and therefore financing the Ukraine war. But the conversations are ongoing. Jameson Greer and Secretary Bessent are talking to their counterparts practically every day. And I feel like compared to a few months ago, we've made an enormous amount of progress, but there's still work to do.
And in terms of work, is it largely the chips being sent to China and the magnets being sent to the United States? Are we going to see refining capabilities in the U.S.? How long will it take to be more self-reliant when it comes to those rare earth minerals and magnets?
Well, President Trump has ordered us to go full speed ahead on that, and basically things are moving forward very quickly. You've seen some public deals, and also there are a lot of things on the table in the trade negotiations with China, and so we care very much about the fact that China has stopped buying our agricultural products and so on, and so we're in a productive negotiation and looking forward to making a lot of progress between now and say Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, are you expecting a big change in terms of USMCA?
I think that's something that it's getting close to the finish line, and so I don't have a lot of comment on that right now.
All right. Well, let me get your take on the issues that you're watching. We're waiting on GDP, of course, to come out, and I know you can't get ahead of these numbers. They'll be out in about 15 minutes' time. But there's a worry about the labor market, as you know, because of these last 3 months. How would you assess jobs right now?
I think the way I think about it, Maria, and this is about a 20-second answer. I hope I have that much time still. The way I think about it is that if you look at the 2023 and 2024, then the household survey where we asked people, hey, how many jobs do you have, said that we created about 2.5 million jobs. And the payroll survey said we created about 4.5 million jobs. And they should say about the same number. And what happened is, after the big revisions that we've seen, the payroll survey number is more like 2.5 million now. So the household survey was right all along. Now, if you're seeing all the strong data, like the retail sales through the roof that we just saw, and then you think about, well, what's going on in the job market if there's a capital spending boom and a retail sales boom, you know, how could that possibly be? Well, if you say, well, what we learned is the household survey is a more reliable survey right now, then you look at the August number of plus 288,000, then kind of everything makes sense. And so that's what I'm leaning towards right now, thinking that I'm going to have to start watching the household survey more closely, because even on the job creation number, it's a more reliable signal.
This credit card has an interest rate that's really, really low. How low? This low. The credit card that's in your wallet right now probably has an interest rate that's really, really high. How high?
I mean, I wonder if you feel that the consumer end of the economy is stronger than, for example, the business side, because you're seeing an enormous amount of outlays and capital expenditures as it relates to AI. And that in and of itself is giving real confidence signals, isn't it?
Yeah, and creating real income for all the people working on that. But you know, I like to, when I'm looking at the retail sales number, I like to look at year-over-year numbers, because that helps you think about what's the current pace of annual GDP growth. And the year-over-year number right now for retail sales is they're up 6%. Now that's nominal. So if you're thinking about what's real growth, then it's going to be that, whatever you think the inflation is running right now. But let's say, you know, it's 2-something. And so what that means is that we're in a sort of 4% growth range on consumption, and consumption's about 70% of GDP, so that's a very, very strong economy.
PMI.
So would you expect consumption to stay strong through year end, and are you expecting a strong economic growth number for the second half of the year?
Yeah, I won't talk about like forward-looking things just because you're about to get a GDP release, but I'll say there's a capital spending boom and there's a consumption boom, and that's because people have a lot of confidence in the White House's policies being successful, and I think that they should have that confidence, because we showed last time in 2017 that policies like this can be very, very effective at producing high income growth and high economic growth.
And of course, therein lies the question in terms of whether or not that growth leads to ultimately companies passing on price increases. I mean, we haven't seen the inflation because we're looking at these numbers and they're low, but do you think at some point something's got to give, that companies will stop eating the tariffs and in fact start passing it on to consumers?
The way I think about it, I don't worry about that at all. And the way I think about it is, last time we had inflation below 2 and really high growth because there was a supply side boom from all of the Trump policies. And so if you have a supply side boom, then you can have growth without runaway inflation. The way to think about it is, suppose that productivity all of a sudden miraculously was 20% higher. Then that would mean the same amount of inputs are producing 20% more stuff. If there's all that extra stuff, then the price of the stuff has to go down. And so that's what it means. What we mean is, when we say that if you have a supply side boom, that it could be growth without inflation, and that's what our expectation is. We think we're going to do it again.
Look, I've got to tell you, I just cannot believe that it took President Trump coming into office for a second time to get people moving their supply chains to America. I mean, he had this broad vision in terms of ensuring that America is not reliant on adversaries like China, and that's what he's playing out. It's all about national security. Why is it that the Congress allowed us to get so vulnerable all of these years?
Right. Well, I think it took a visionary like President Trump to look ahead and see how we can defend our country and defend our workers. You know, there was an academic literature that said that when China entered the WTO, that it caused like pockets of despair throughout the country. When factories closed, it led to substance abuse problems and divorce and everything. And so clearly the American people have felt the pain of, you know, offshoring American jobs. And so President Trump is right to bring them back here. And I got to tell you that, you know, we talk about the data, the releases and stuff like that, but I meet with CEOs from our top companies here in the White House almost every day, and almost everybody's coming in and saying, hey, you know what, I just want you to know that we're going to open up a new $30 billion plant, you know, in this state or that state. And it's really, really something that I've never seen before, and the policies are are working. They're working the way we want.
Very, very
may
powerful
resume in
stuff.
less than a
Kevin,
minute.
it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Great to see you too, Maria.
All right, Kevin Hassett at the White House.
The thing we hear over and over again is, why do I need a deodorant for private parts? I can just take a shower. So we put Mando to the test and compared.
Look at that, it came within 1 penny of the price target. How pissed would you be if you had your sell order in at 262 and it comes all the way up from holding $1.11, cracking through $1.62. Going into the short zone and then coming within 1 penny. See, so
SUGP.
there could be a trade here for like a scalper if it's set up, but this little flush here ain't gonna get the job done. And this candle right here, it's not a bullish candle. Because with these candles forming,
MSTZ.
CPOP. CPOP.